Julian believes that forcing me to wear an apron and serve drinks to his mistress is the final humiliation to make me sign those divorce papers with $0 to my name. He is drunk on victory as she flaunts my family heirloom diamond necklace. They assume I am a pathetic mouse, but they are about to learn that this mouse sits atop an empire capable of crushing them with one single breath. My name is Serafina, and tonight, I am a ghost in my own home. I stood at the edge of the expansive living room on the 72nd floor of our Chicago penthouse, watching the elite of the legal world swirl around like vultures in expensive silk. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights, but the atmosphere inside was suffocating, thick with the scent of $500 steaks and the heavy metallic tang of my own suppressed rage. This was the night Julian had dreamed of for a decade, the night he was officially named a senior partner at Vanguard and Sterling. Earlier that evening, Julian had cornered me in our master suite. He didn't look at me with love or even basic respect. Instead, he threw a stiff black polyester server's vest and a white apron onto the bed. "You are useless in social settings." "Serafina," he had hissed, his voice cold and sharp as a razor. "You stand there like a statue, adding nothing of value to my professional image. Since you cannot converse like a sophisticated wife, the least you can do is be productive. Put this on. You will serve the drinks tonight." I had stared at the uniform, my fingers trembling slightly as I touched the cheap fabric. "Julian, you can't be serious. Our guests, they know I'm your wife." He had let out a short, bark-like laugh. "They know you are the penniless girl I rescued from obscurity. Tonight, they will see you as you truly are. A servant. Now. Move. Now." I moved through the crowd with a heavy silver tray, my movements mechanical. I was a shadow in the corner of their vision. Then, the double doors opened, and Bianca walked in. She was younger, draped in a crimson silk dress that cost more than most people's annual salary. Without a moment of hesitation, she walked to the head of the long mahogany dining table and sat in my chair. My breath hitched in my throat when I saw what was around her neck. Resting against her collarbone was the tear of Minerva. It was a diamond necklace, an heirloom from the Kensington line that had been in my family for over 100 years. Julian had told me 90 days ago that he was taking it to a specialist for maintenance and insurance appraisal. Seeing it on her felt like a physical blow to my chest. I approached the table to refill the water glasses. Julian leaned back, his eyes gleaming with a cruel, predatory satisfaction. He intentionally tilted his glass of red wine, letting the dark liquid splash across the white marble floor, the droplets staining the hem of my apron. "Oh, look at that," Julian said, his voice booming so the entire table of partners hushed to listen. "You really are as clumsy as you are quiet. Get on your knees and clean this up. Serafina, right now. We wouldn't want someone to slip on your incompetence." A few of the guests chuckled, a low, buzzing sound of mockery. Bianca leaned over, her eyes sparkling with malice as she held out her empty glass toward me. "While you are down there, could you be a dear and get me more of that $2,000 Cabernet? A good little servant always knows how to keep the important guests happy." I looked up at Julian, hoping to find a flicker of the man I thought I had married. Instead, I saw only pure, unadulterated contempt. He looked at me as if I were a piece of old, dusty furniture that had stayed in the room too long. I knelt on the hard marble, the cold stone biting into my knees. I took a linen napkin and began to blot the wine, feeling the weight of dozens of judgmental eyes on my back. "It is such a shame." I heard one woman whisper to her husband, "He is so brilliant, and he is tied to such a pathetic, submissive little mouse. She has no pride at all. I didn't break. I didn't cry. Instead, I used those moments on the floor to burn their faces into my memory. Every smirk, every whispered insult, every condescending glance was a data point I filed away. My mind was a steel trap, and I was recording the debt they were all incurring. When I finished, I gathered the soiled napkins and the tray to return to the kitchen. As I reached the quiet of the pantry, I noticed something unusual. A small black plastic tab was stuck to the underside of the velvet lining on the serving tray. I peeled it back, my heart pounding a steady, rhythmic beat of realization. It was a high-end digital recorder, the kind Julian used for confidential depositions. He had planted it there himself. He wasn't just trying to humiliate me. He was recording my reactions, hoping I would snap, scream, or beg so he could use it as evidence of my instability in the divorce proceedings. He thought he was playing a game of chess against a pawn. He had no idea he was already in checkmate. I slipped the recorder into my hidden pocket, a cold, hard smile finally touching my lips. I retreated from the sounds of laughter and the clinking of crystal, stepping into the cramped, windowless maid's quarters that Julian had relegated me to months ago. The air in this small corner of the 72nd floor penthouse was stale, but it was the only place where the mask could finally slip. I unbuttoned the cheap polyester server's vest, letting it fall to the floor like a shedskin. In front of the small, cracked mirror, I pulled my hair up and turned away. There it was, etched into the pale skin at the nape of my neck, a small, intricate crest of a lion gripping a compass. It was the Kensington mark, a symbol of a lineage that owned the very shadows Julian tried to walk in. To the world, I was Serafina, the quiet, penniless wife of a rising legal star. To Julian, I was a social liability he had plucked from obscurity. But in reality, I am Serafina H. Kensington, the sole heir to the Kensington Global Group. My family moves the world's minerals and controls the logistics of 3 continents. My net worth is a figure so vast that most people cannot even wrap their minds around it. A fortune built over 100 years of absolute dominance. I had hidden my identity for a simple, perhaps naive, reason. After my father passed away 5 years ago, I was surrounded by men who looked at me and saw a mountain of gold rather than a woman. I wanted to find someone who would love the soul beneath the silk. I met Julian 7 years ago at a Greasy Spoon diner on the South Side. He was a third-year law student with holes in his shoes and $60,000 in debt. I fell for his hunger and his talk of justice. I thought I had found a diamond in the rough. Instead, I had found a parasite. I used my resources to build the pedestal he now stood upon. Julian never knew that the $80,000 scholarship he suddenly won in his final semester was a phantom fund I created. He never knew that his position at Vanguard and Sterling was the result of a single, anonymous phone call from my estate manager. For the last 4 years, I have been his silent architect. Every time he won a landmark case, it was because I had spent sleepless nights ensuring the right evidence found its way to his desk or that the opposing counsel was quietly compromised by their own secrets. I glanced down at the battered silver watch on my wrist. Julian had laughed at it last week, saying, "Serafina, that piece of junk is an embarrassment. It looks like something a beggar would wear." He had no idea it was a one-of-a-kind Patek Philippe, a gift from my father, handcrafted with a movement that cost more than $250,000. To Julian, its lack of flashy gold meant it was worthless. A wave of cold disgust washed over me. I realized now that Julian didn't love me when we met. He loved the ego boost of being my savior. He needed me to be poor and helpless so he could feel like a god. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a victim to highlight his own perceived greatness. I reached into the hollowed-out base of a decorative lamp and pulled out a sleek, black encrypted smartphone. It felt heavy with the weight of the power I had kept caged for too long. I dialed a number that was burned into my memory, a number that connected directly to the most feared legal mind in the country, Kensington Estate. Thorne speaking. A deep, measured voice answered on the first ring. I looked at my reflection. seeing the lion behind the mouse for the first time in years. "Marcus, it is me." There was a sharp, audible intake of breath. "Miss Kensington, we have been waiting for your word for a very long time. Is everything all right?" My voice was a frozen blade, devoid of the submissive tone I had used for Julian. "No, Marcus, it is not. My husband just made me scrub his floor while his mistress wore the tear of Minerva. He thinks I am a broken dog. He thinks I have nothing. What are your orders?" "Miss, the trial phase is over. Activate the purge protocol," I commanded, the words tasting like iron. Every gift, every win, and every cent I gave him, I want it back. I want him to watch his world burn from the very bottom. "Understood. Miss Kensington, we shall begin within the hour." "Good," I said, my heart turning to stone. "The masquerade is over." In the weeks following that disastrous party, Julian's cruelty transformed into a calculated, systemic stripping of my dignity. He treated our home like a corporate audit, forcing me to present a detailed ledger for every single cent I spent. I had to stand in the kitchen every Sunday evening at 7 o'clock, trembling as I handed over crumpled receipts for eggs, milk, and detergent. If a total was off by even 50 cents, he would spend an hour lecturing me on the value of $1 and my utter lack of contribution to our household. While he monitored my spending on bread, I watched the joint bank account bleed thousands of dollars every few days. The entries were always labeled as business development or client acquisition. I knew the truth. Those thousands of dollars were paying for Cartier bracelets and weekend trips to Aspen for Bianca. He wasn't even trying to hide it well. He simply assumed I was too stupid or too broken to notice. One Tuesday morning, Julian tossed a stack of legal documents onto the breakfast table. "Sign these." "Serafina," he said, not even looking up from his tablet. "It is a new comprehensive life and disability insurance policy. Since you have no career of your own, I need to ensure you are not a total financial burden if something happens to you." I looked at the fine print. These weren't insurance papers. They were applications for high-interest, unsecured personal loans totaling $2 million, all drafted in my name. He wanted my signature so he could funnel the cash into his own pockets while leaving me with the liability. I don't understand some of these terms." "Julian," I whispered, forcing a slight quiver into my voice. "Could you explain why there are so many pages?" He slammed his hand on the table, making the coffee cups rattle. "Just sign them. You don't need to understand. You are a scar on my perfect career. Seraphine. A dull, lifeless stain on the reputation I have spent 10 years building. The least you can do is sign the damn papers so I can protect our future." I signed them, my hand shaking with a fake terror that masked a cold, internal fury. He saw a submissive wife. I saw a man handing me the final evidence I needed for his destruction. In the quiet hours when Julian was out closing deals with Bianca, I accessed the encrypted server on my laptop. For 6 months, I had been monitoring every keystroke he made. I had already found the digital trail for Vein Solutions, a shell company he had registered in Delaware. He was using it to wash bribe money from corrupt judges and to hide the kickbacks he received for throwing cases. My phone buzzed with a series of notifications. It was a gallery of images sent from an unknown number, though I knew the sender immediately. Bianca. The photos were graphic, showing her and Julian in various states of undress in our own guest bedroom. One photo featured her holding a glass of champagne, smiling triumphantly while wearing my mother's pearl earrings. The caption read, "He's never coming back to you. Why don't you just disappear?" when Julian returned home that night. I met him in the hallway, clutching my phone and sobbing uncontrollably. "How could you?" "Julian, who is this woman? Please, tell me it's not true." I collapsed against the wall, burying my face in my hands. I let my shoulders heave, producing the perfect image of a woman whose world had just ended, Julian didn't offer a hand to help me up. He stepped over me as if I were a pile of laundry. Don't be dramatic. Serafina. It was bound to happen. You should have expected this. He thought he had won. He thought his plan to orchestrate a $5 million financial collapse was going to work. My spyware had captured his private chats with his broker, detailing how he was going to accidentally lose all our assets in a bad trade right before the divorce, leaving me with nothing but millions of dollars in debt while he moved his hidden Vein Solutions wealth offshore. But the biggest revelation came from his emails to Bianca. He wasn't in love with her. He was meticulously documenting her father's influence at Vanguard and Sterling. He was using her body to get to her father's seat on the board of directors. Julian was a man who saw everyone as a stepping stone. He truly believed he was the smartest person in every room. I sat on the floor, listening to him hum a tune in the shower, and I wiped away my fake tears. He was so busy looking at the $5 million he thought he was stealing that he hadn't noticed the $1.5 trillion shadow looming over him. Monday morning arrived with a cold, gray sky that seemed to press against the windows of the penthouse. I was standing in the kitchen, the soft hum of the coffee machine the only sound in the suffocating silence. It was exactly 8 in the morning when the heavy thud of a manila envelope hit the marble island, sliding through a puddle of spilled cream. Julian stood there, his suit tailored to perfection, his face a mask of arrogant triumph. There it is. Serafina. The end of your fortunate little accident of a marriage. I didn't stop pouring my coffee. My hand remained steady as the dark liquid filled the cup. I assume those are the divorce papers. Do not act like you are surprised, he snapped, pulling out a chair and sitting down with the posture of a king. I have had my legal team working on this for 72 hours straight. You get nothing. 0 cents. No alimony. No share of the property, and certainly no piece of my firm. You contributed absolutely nothing to my success. You were a weight around my neck for 10 long years, and I am finally cutting the cord. I turned to look at him, my expression unreadable. You want me to leave with nothing? After everything I gave you, you gave me nothing but a quiet house and a dull reputation. He sneered. You have 24 hours to vacate this premises. I have already instructed the building security to deactivate your key card by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Do not touch anything I bought. No clothes, no shoes, and certainly no electronics. You leave with what you brought into this house, which was basically the rags on your back. I set the coffee cup down slowly. What about the tear of Minerva? That necklace belongs to my family. Julian. It has been passed down for generations. You said it was being appraised. He let out a dry, mocking laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. That necklace, it is already in much better hands. It belongs to a woman who actually knows how to shine in a room, not a pathetic little waitress who hides in the shadows. Bianca looks beautiful in it. You would only make it look cheap. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed on the counter. He looked at the screen and smirked, tapping the speakerphone button. Bianca's voice filled the kitchen, high-pitched and dripping with fake sweetness. Julian. Darling, did you tell the mouse the news yet? I just booked the flights to the Maldives. First class. Of course. We are going to spend 3 weeks in that private villa we talked about. I cannot believe we are using her little nest egg for the down payment. It is almost poetic, isn't it? Julian grinned at me, his eyes full of malice. Every penny of that savings account you were so proud of is now funding our celebration. Serafina. It is the only useful thing you have ever done. I walked over to the island and picked up a pen. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even flinch at the sound of his mistress laughing at my supposed poverty. I flipped to the last page of the thick document and signed my name in a sharp, elegant script. Julian's eyes widened slightly. He had expected a fight. He had expected me to beg for a few $1,000s just to survive. You... You aren't even going to read the terms. I could be sending you to the streets with $5 million in debt for all you know. I know exactly what is in these papers. Julian, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I know you better than you think. He stood up, his face reddening with a mix of confusion and irritation. Fine. Be a martyr. See how far that gets you. By this time tomorrow, you will be begging for scraps on the streets of Chicago. No one is going to help a talentless, penniless divorcee like you. I didn't answer him. I walked back to my small room and pulled a battered, nondescript suitcase from under the bed. I packed my old, dented laptop in a thick, black leather folder I had kept hidden behind a loose floorboard. These were the only things of value I needed. As I reached the front door, Julian was leaning against the wall, sipping his coffee and watching me with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. Goodbye, Serafina. Try not to get too cold out there. I paused at the threshold, my hand on the heavy gold handle. I turned my head just enough to catch his eye. You have spent so long looking down at me, Julian, that you forgot to look at who I actually am, I said, the words falling like ice. You picked the wrong person to underestimate, and you are going to regret this day for the rest of your very short, very miserable career. I stepped out into the hallway without looking back, the sound of the door clicking shut behind me signaling the start of his end. The heavy glass doors of the penthouse lobby clicked shut behind me, the sound echoing like a final gavel strike. I stood on the sidewalk of Michigan Avenue, my battered suitcase at my feet, looking like just another victim of the city's cold indifference. But as a sleek, midnight black limousine glided to the curb and came to a silent halt, the atmosphere shifted. The driver, a man who had served my family for over 2 decades, stepped out and bowed his head deeply. Welcome back, Miss Kensington, he said, his voice thick with a respect that Julian had never once shown me. It is a pleasure to see you in your true element again. I stepped into the plush, leather-scented interior of the vehicle. Sitting across from me was Marcus Thorne, the man who managed the Kensington billions with the precision of a surgeon. He handed me a glass of chilled mineral water and a thick black leather folder. Report, I said, my voice vibrating with a cold authority that had been dormant for too long. It is worse than we anticipated. Miss Kensington, Marcus began, his eyes sharp behind his silver-rimmed glasses. Julian has been using your identity to funnel offshore accounts and commit tax fraud for the past 3 years. He thought your lack of financial literacy was a shield, but he has left a digital trail a mile wide. He has been signing your name on documents that would land him in federal prison for 25 years. I leaned back, a dark satisfaction blooming in my chest. Good. Let him dig his own grave. What about the firm Vanguard and Sterling is over-leveraged? Marcus replied. They took out massive loans for their recent expansion. I have already initiated the buyout through our subsidiary, Aegis Holdings. By tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, you will technically be your ex-husband's landlord and his primary creditor. I have also frozen every Kensington-linked asset he has been indirectly touching. That includes the penthouse. I looked out the tinted window at the towering skyscrapers. He really thinks he owns that place. He has no idea the entire building was a birthday gift from my father when I turned 21. He will find out soon enough, Marcus said. He handed me a secondary device, a secure satellite phone. The partners you helped him secure. They are waiting for your call for the next 2 hours. As the limo circled the city, I made 12 phone calls. I spoke to CEOs, senators, and hedge fund titans men who had only taken Julian's calls because I had whispered the right words in their ears years ago. It's Serafina, I said to the head of a global shipping conglomerate. The favor I did for you 3 years ago, I am calling it in. Drop Julian's firm by the end of the business day. Tell them his internal ethics no longer align with your brand. By the time I hung up the final call, Julian's professional world was already beginning to crumble, and he was likely still celebrating in the penthouse I owned. Marcus then handed me a sealed black envelope. This is the evidence of his embezzlement from client trust funds. Marcus noted, he has been skimming about 15% off the top of every major settlement to fund his lifestyle with the Mistress. Speaking of the Mistress, we ran a deep dive on Bianca. I raised an eyebrow. And she is a fraud. Miss Kensington, she is nearly $3 million in debt to offshore creditors. She has been targeting Julian because she thinks he is the one with the Kensington connection. She is using him to pay off her predatory loans. They are two parasites trying to bleed each other dry. I let out a soft, icy laugh. How poetic. Marcus, I want the divorce mediation scheduled for the earliest possible date, this Friday at 10 o'clock in the morning. I want him at his most arrogant when I walk in. I have already alerted the court, Marcus said, and your wardrobe prepare the custom suit from the Paris collection, I replied, the one that costs more than Julian's entire career earnings. If he wants a show, I am going to give him a masterpiece. I looked at the black folder in my lap. I felt no pity, only a chilling sense of justice. Julian had spent years trying to make me feel small, but he was about to realize that you should never try to drown someone who owns the entire ocean. He said I would be begging for scraps. Marcus, I whispered, a cold glint in my eyes. I want to make sure he remembers those words when he is the one starving. The clock on the courtroom wall struck 10 o'clock as I pushed open the heavy oak doors. Julian was already there, seated at the plaintiff's table with a grin that could have curdled milk. He was flanked by 4 lawyers from a high-profile firm and Bianca, who sat in the front row, brazenly wearing the tear of Minerva. She leaned into him, whispering something that made him chuckle. He looked like a man who had already won the lottery and was just waiting to collect his check. I walked down the center aisle, the sharp click of my designer heels echoing against the marble floor. I wasn't wearing the faded floral dress or the servant's apron today. I was draped in a black wool silk blend custom-tailored in Paris, a suit that cost exactly $45,000. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, severe bun, revealing the Kensington mark on my neck for anyone brave enough to look. Julian's eyes swept over me, and for a split second, he looked confused. Then, the arrogance returned. Look at you, he sneered as I sat at the empty defense table. Where did you steal that suit? Serafina, did you use the last of my savings to buy a costume? It won't save you from the streets. The judge entered, and the hearing began. Julian's lead attorney stood up with a flourish. Your Honor, we are here to settle a clear-cut case of marital fraud. For 10 years, my client has supported this woman only for her to leech off his hard-earned success. She is a gold digger of the highest order. We are seeking a full judgment of $5 million in damages for his emotional suffering and the return of every cent she misappropriated. Julian stood up, slamming a stack of papers onto the table. I have the proof right here. I have every receipt from the last 12 months. She spent nearly $10,000 on frivolous household expenses while I worked 80 hours a week to keep us afloat. She is a parasite. She is a nobody. The judge looked down at me over his spectacles. Ms. Serafina, do you have a response to these allegations? Where is your legal counsel? I didn't say a word. I simply looked toward the back of the room and gave a single, slight nod. The heavy doors opened again, and Marcus Thorne stepped inside, followed by 2 assistants carrying briefcases. He didn't just walk, he commanded the space. He moved toward the front of the room with the grace of a predator. My name is Marcus Thorne, and I represent the third-party interest in this matter, he announced, his voice like rolling thunder. The Kensington Global Group. Julian let out a loud, mocking bark of laughter. Oh, please, Kensington, you have got to be kidding me. Serafina, you really are desperate. How much did you pay this actor to stand there? Everyone knows the Kensington family doesn't even acknowledge the existence of people like us. Marcus ignored him entirely. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a series of original documents, each bearing the heavy, embossed gold seal of the Kensington estate. He handed them to the court clerk. We are here to provide the court with the original birth certificate and the irrevocable trust documents for Serafina H. Kensington, Marcus said, his eyes finally fixing on Julian with a look of pure pity. We are also here to contest the ownership of the so-called marital assets, all of which are technically the property of the Kensington Trust, including the penthouse my client's husband has been illegally occupying. The courtroom fell into a silence so profound it felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. The judge's eyes widened as he flipped through the papers, his fingers tracing the authenticity of the royal seals. He looked at me, then at the documents, then back at Julian. Julian's face went from flushed red to a ghostly, sickly white. His hand, which had been pointing at me in accusation just moments ago, began to tremble. That is impossible. You are just a waitress. You are poor. You are nothing. I was never nothing. Julian, I said, my voice quiet and cold. I was just waiting to see if you were worth the truth. It turns out you aren't worth even a single cent of it. He sat back down, his knees buckling. He looked around the room, realizing that the 4 lawyers he had hired were already closing their briefcases and inching away from him. He wasn't just losing a divorce. He was staring into the mouth of a machine that could erase his entire existence before lunch. Your Honor, Julian whispered, his voice cracking with a sudden, sharp terror. I didn't know. I didn't mean to. The judge didn't even look at him. He was too busy staring at the woman who could buy the entire courthouse and everyone in it without even checking her balance. The judge cleared his throat, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the tomb-like silence of the courtroom. He looked at the documents provided by Marcus Thorne, his eyes widening behind his spectacles as he leaned toward his microphone. The court has verified the authenticity of these records. The judge began, his voice trembling slightly. The certified net worth of the respondent, Serafina H. Kensington, is confirmed to be in excess of $1.5 trillion. This includes controlling interest in Kensington Global, 84 offshore subsidiaries, and the land titles for approximately 12% of the Chicago downtown area. Julian didn't just sit down, he crumpled. It was as if the bones in his legs had turned to liquid, sending him crashing into his chair with a heavy thud. Beside him, Bianca's reaction was even more visceral. She let go of Julian's arm so fast it looked like she had been burned, scooting her chair a full 2 feet away from him. She looked at Julian not with love, but with a sudden, sharp terror, as if he were a sinking ship she needed to flee. I stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of my suit. Julian, do you remember that evening in June when you forced me to sign those insurance papers? You were so arrogant, so sure that I was too stupid to read the fine print. You didn't notice that my legal team had slipped a 1-page addendum into the middle of that stack of 200 pages. Marcus Thorne stepped forward, placing a fresh document on the judge's bench. This addendum, signed and notarized by Mr. Vance himself, states that any and all assets or income generated during the marriage that are found to be connected to acts of marital deceit or professional misconduct shall be forfeited entirely to the victimized party. Since Mr. Vance has been funneling his salary into a mistress and committing fraud, the Kensington Trust has already legally seized every cent of his earnings from the last 3 years. Julian's mouth worked silently for a moment before a strangled sound escaped his throat. You, this is a setup. You can't just, you were my wife, I cared for you. You cared for a version of me you could control. Julian, I replied, my voice as cold as a winter morning in the Atlantic. Marcus wasn't finished. Furthermore, the document Mr. Vance signed also included a clause for asset management. He unknowingly agreed to pay a professional fee of $15 million to the Kensington estate for the supervision of his career. Since his accounts are now frozen, We are filing a lien against his future earnings for the next 40 years. Bianca suddenly stood up, her face pale. I didn't know, Your Honor. I had no idea he was married to someone like this. He told me she was a charity case. I'm a victim here too. I turned my gaze to her, my eyes locking onto the diamonds around her neck. Take it off, Bianca. Now. Bianca clutched at her throat, her fingers shaking. What? No, Julian gave this to me. It's mine. That is the tear of Minerva, I said, my voice rising with a dangerous edge. It is a Kensington heirloom that has been in my family for over 100 years. Julian took it under the guise of maintenance and gave it to you. In the eyes of the law, that is not a gift. It is grand larceny. It is a stolen artifact. On my cue, 2 uniformed police officers who had been waiting at the back of the room stepped forward. The judge nodded solemnly. Officers, please secure the evidence. This hearing is no longer a simple division of assets. The officers moved toward the plaintiff's table. One of them took Bianca by the arm, while the other began the process of documenting the stolen jewelry. Bianca started to sob, her voice high and shrill. Please, I'll give it back. Just don't. Don't arrest me. Julian lunged across the table, trying to grab my hand, his eyes bloodshot and pleading. Sarah, honey, please, we can talk about this. I was confused. I was under so much pressure at the firm. I still love you. Please don't do this to me. Marcus Thorne stepped between us with the grace of a stone wall, his hand firmly pushing Julian back into his seat. Do not address Miss Kensington again. Mr. Vance, you are no longer in a position to negotiate. The judge slammed his gavel down 3 times. The sound final and absolute, in light of the evidence of tax fraud, embezzlement, and the theft of high-value heirlooms. I am hereby suspending these civil proceedings. This matter is being referred immediately to the district attorney's office for a full criminal investigation. Mr. Vance, your passport is revoked as of this moment. Bailiffs, take them into custody for questioning. As the officers began to lead a sobbing Bianca and a catatonic Julian away, I stood there, watching the man who had tried to destroy me realize that he had never even been a player in the game. He was just a bug beneath the wheel of a trillion-dollar machine. Within the cold, sterile corridors of the courthouse, the sound of loyalty breaking was louder than the sirens outside. I watched through the one-way glass of an interrogation room as Bianca sang to the detectives like a bird whose cage had just been opened. She did not hesitate for even a single second. The moment she realized Julian was no longer a golden ticket but a lead weight dragging her into a prison cell, she opened her phone and handed over every encrypted message, every deleted recording, and every scrap of evidence she had gathered as her own insurance policy. He was going to do it next week. Bianca sobbed into a crumpled tissue, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and self-preservation. He told me he had a stash of high-potency sleep medication that he bought from some contact in the city. He said he would mix it into her tea after the mediation. He said if she just slipped away quietly in her sleep, we would have her $5 million in savings and her life insurance without any of the divorce mess. I told him it was crazy, but he insisted the lead detective looked at the transcript of a message Julian had sent her 14 days ago. The cocktail is ready. Once she is out of the picture, we can finally live the life we deserve. This was no longer a messy divorce. This was a felony. It was attempted murder for a measly sum of money Julian thought I possessed. The judge's order was immediate and absolute. Julian Vance was remanded to the Cook County Jail without the possibility of bail, pending a formal indictment for conspiracy to commit murder. As the officers led Bianca toward a side exit to process her deal for leniency, she spotted me standing near Marcus. She broke away, her eyes wild and desperate, reaching out toward me with claw-like fingers. "Serafina, please? You have to listen to me. I only went along with him because I was scared. He is a monster. I have nothing left. My creditors are going to kill me if I don't pay them by Friday. Please. You are so powerful now. I am a great marketing director. Give me a job at Kensington. Let me work for you. I will do anything. I looked at her with a detachment that felt like a winter frost. I have a very strict policy. Bianca, I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the silent hall. I never hire people who have a history of betraying their previous employers. It is a matter of basic hygiene. A small, cold smile touched my lips as I leaned in slightly. And besides, I bought the firm you currently work for through a holding company yesterday afternoon. I signed your termination papers exactly 10 minutes ago. You are not only unemployed, Bianca, you are blacklisted from every major legal and marketing firm in the entire Midwest. You will find that the world is a very small place when a Kensington closes the doors. Across the city, Julian sat on a thin, plastic-covered cot in a cell that smelled of bleach and human despair. He looked up at a flickering television mounted in the corner of the common area. The news ticker at the bottom of the screen confirmed his worst nightmare. All his personal assets were being frozen pending a federal investigation. Senior partners cooperate with federal investigators in massive embezzlement and fraud probe. He watched in horror as his former mentor, a man he had idolized for 15 years, stood before a forest of microphones and publicly denounced him. We are horrified by the actions of Mr. Vance, the partner said, looking straight into the camera with a rehearsed expression of disgust. We are cooperating 100% with the authorities to ensure justice is served for all the clients he defrauded. Even Bianca's father, the man Julian had risked everything to impress, issued a statement through a spokesperson. He was disowning his daughter and cutting off every cent of financial support that Julian had been counting on to pay for a top-tier defense. Julian was truly alone, stripped of his title, his money, and his future. Julian sat in the darkness of his cell, the silence of the prison walls finally amplifying the magnitude of his ruin. The glass facade of Vanguard and Sterling reflected the gray Chicago sky as I stepped out of the limousine. This time, the security guards did not look through me. They stood at attention, their faces pale with the sudden realization that the woman they had once ignored was now the hand that signed their paychecks. I walked into the grand lobby, Marcus Thorne a half-step behind me, and took the private elevator to the top floor. I entered the boardroom where the senior partners were gathered. These were the same men who had laughed as I knelt to scrub wine off the floor. Now, they stood up in unison, a chorus of expensive suits and trembling hands. I sat at the head of the table, the seat Julian had once coveted, and placed my black leather folder on the polished wood. Effective 9 o'clock this morning, Aegis Holdings has completed the acquisition of this firm, I stated, my voice devoid of warmth. My first order as chairwoman is a comprehensive forensic audit of every case Julian Vance has touched for the last 5 years. I want every stone overturned. If there is a single whisper of a bribe, a rigged jury, or a compromised judge, I want it on my desk by sunset. The fallout was instantaneous and devastating. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the auditors had uncovered a cesspool of corruption. Julian had not been a legal prodigy. He had been a bagman. He had used a network of shell companies to move bribe money to at least 3 different judges to ensure favorable rulings for his corporate clients. As the news broke, the legal community did not just turn its back on him, it recoiled in horror. One by one, the partners who had mocked me at the party began to line up outside my office. They brought expensive bouquets and handwritten apologies, their voices quivering as they begged for their positions. "Serafina, please, we did not know." One of them stammered, his eyes darting to the floor. "We were just following Julian's lead. We would be honored to continue working under your brilliant leadership. I did not even look up from my tablet. You did not see a woman that night. You saw a target. Leave. Your resignation letter should be on my desk within 60 minutes. I then issued a formal directive to the American Bar Association and the various legal societies. I demanded the immediate and permanent revocation of every award, plaque, and commendation Julian had ever received. His Lawyer of the Year trophy and his 30 under 30 honors were stripped away before the ink on the audit report was even dry. By the time the sun began to set, the Bar Association had issued an emergency ruling. Julian Vance was officially and permanently disbarred. He would never step foot in a courtroom again, except as a defendant. Julian, sitting in his cell, received one more piece of news from his court-appointed attorney. Bianca had managed to evade the initial police sweep long enough to access his emergency offshore account, the one he thought only he knew about. She had drained the last $450,000 in cash and disappeared into the night. He was left with exactly $0 and a mounting debt of millions. I directed Marcus to take the $15 million in fines and liquidated assets we had seized from Julian to establish the Kensington Foundation for Marital Justice. It was a fund specifically designed to provide legal and psychological support for victims of emotional and financial abuse in marriage. Julian's vanity was literally paying for the salvation of the people he most despised. I visited the detention center one last time. I stood behind the reinforced glass, looking at the hollow shell of a man who had once thought he was a god. You finally figured it out, did not you? I asked, the intercom carrying my voice into his miserable world. The poverty, the apron, the quiet submissiveness. It was never about lack of money. Julian, it was a personality test, a test of your character, your loyalty, and your soul, and you trundled into that failure with such greedy enthusiasm. Julian leaned forward, his voice a broken whisper. You did this. You set me up from the very beginning. I leaned in, my eyes cold and unyielding. I did not set the trap. Julian, I just built the cage. And here is the part that will truly haunt you while you rot in here. I knew about Bianca before you even took her to lunch for the first time. I watched you plan your affair. I watched you buy her that first bracelet with our grocery money. I could have stopped it at any moment, but I wanted to see exactly how far you would go to destroy the woman who gave you everything. You did this to yourself. I just let you finish what you started. I stood up and walked away, leaving him to the silence of his own making. The final criminal trial was not just a legal proceeding, it was a televised execution of Julian's ego. The courtroom was packed with journalists, former colleagues, and the curious public, all gathered to witness the fall of the man who had tried to play God. The judge sat high on his bench, looking down at Julian with a cold, piercing gaze that offered no mercy. Julian Vance. The judge began, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. For the crimes of grand embezzlement, systematic tax fraud, and the heinous conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm to your spouse, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison. You will serve every day of that time without the possibility of early release. The room erupted. Julian's face went a ghostly shade of white as the bailiffs moved in to shackle his wrists. Behind him, the news about his accomplice was just as grim. Bianca, having been stripped of her temporary visa status due to her criminal involvement, was ordered to be deported back to her home country immediately after her own shorter sentence. Because of the massive civil judgment I had won against her, every cent she would ever earn for the rest of her life would be garnished to pay back the Kensington Trust. She was destined to spend her days serving tables at a cheap, roadside diner, a mirror image of the life she had tried to force upon me. As I walked out of the courthouse, the midday sun hit the polished silver of the Kensington fleet waiting at the curb. I was surrounded by a phalanx of 20 security guards, their black suits creating a wall between me and the screaming media. Julian was being led to a transport van in the same courtyard. When he saw me, he lost the last of his sanity. Serafina. You monster, he screamed, his voice cracking with a desperate, guttural rage. You took everything you let me do it. You watched me fail. You were supposed to love me. I raised my hand, signaling my guards to stop. I walked slowly toward the fence that separated us. I was wearing a deep navy power suit, and around my neck, the tear of Minerva sparkled with a blinding, restored brilliance. The diamonds seemed to drink in the sunlight. I looked at him, seeing nothing but a small, pathetic man who had mistaken kindness for weakness. You forgot one very important detail. Julian, I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a mountain. That little digital recorder you hid in my serving tray to catch me snapping, you forgot to turn it off when you brought it back to your office. It recorded your entire conversation with Bianca about the sleeping medication. It was not my word against yours. It was your own voice that sealed your fate. Julian's eyes went wide, his mouth hanging open as the realization hit him like a physical blow. You wanted me to serve wine. Julian, I continued, a thin, icy smile touching my lips. Now you will have to serve time in a dark, lonely hole. And while you are there, remember this. I am not a mouse. I am the Empire. By the end of the week, every luxury item Julian had ever owned was gone. His $500,000 sports car, his collection of $20,000 watches, and even his designer suits were sold at a public auction. The proceeds, totaling nearly $2 million, were distributed to the victims of the cases he had rigged. His parents, unable to bear the shame of their son's public disgrace, had legally changed their last name and moved to a remote town, refusing to take his collect calls from prison. I walked across the tarmac of the private airfield, the engines of the Kensington jet humming a low, powerful tune. Marcus Thorne stood at the boarding stairs holding a satellite phone. The board is waiting for your quarterly report. Miss Kensington, the markets are reacting very favorably to the new leadership. Let them wait 10 minutes. Marcus, I said, looking back at the Chicago skyline one last time. I have one last delivery to confirm. In a cramped, 6 by 8 foot cell at the correctional facility, Julian sat on his thin mattress, staring at the concrete wall. The heavy steel door groaned open, and a guard placed a small wooden crate on the floor. Inside was a single bottle of the most expensive red wine in the world, the exact vintage Julian had spilled on the floor and forced me to clean on my knees. Attached to the neck of the bottle was a small, elegant card. Julian's fingers trembled as he read the words, "Serve it well, Julian. You have exactly 5,475 days to think about the service. Thank you for listening to this story. Please let us know in the comments where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like the video, and support us by hitting the hype button so this story can reach even more people.